a lot of people seem to like this window manager and use it a lot and talk about patching for this since there's no real configuration file. So I thought I would go through the source code and point out what things are, what they mean, and how you can examine it yourself, because it's like everyone just uses patches and no one looks at the code themselves and tries making their own. It's not that complicated. It's not very intimidating. And I think if I could walk through some of the basics of the code and talk about how X works and xlib works, which is what they use, people will start contributing more to the community and writing their own stuff, or not be so afraid to at least examine things if you want to change something. So yeah, first of all, if you don't know what this is, you probably shouldn't be watching the video, or you could just go to the link and read it, whatever. So DWM, tiling window manager for X. If you're using Wayland, don't use this. So yeah, here's the URL. I'll paste it in the description. First, let's go ahead and clone this. So somewhere around here, I think near the bottom. Yep, here. So under development, they have this little command. If you have git installed git, you can go ahead and run git clone this URL. That's going to download the source code from their servers. So I have it open here. I'll quit out of it just to show you. These are the contents. I just cloned it. Nothing's changed yet. So the main file we're going to be looking at is dwm.c. This is a C source code file, the programming language C. If you only know like a little bit of Bash or Python or JavaScript, whatever, you can still follow along. Don't be intimidated by the C language. A lot of it is going to be basic stuff that you know, for loops, if statements, basic variables. It's not complicated at all. So I'm going to open this up in NeoVim. You could use whatever editor you want. I'll zoom in a little bit here. So first, let's go to the very bottom of the file. This is where the magic starts happening. So this is our main function. So in C and some other languages, this is your entry point to the program. So when it's first started, this is what gets executed first, the very start of the function. So there are some things here. You don't really need to know this first section. This is like checking command line arguments, seeing if they passed in like -v. That's checking the version. So it'll print the version and stop the program. Same with like some other stuff. None of that really matters. The very start of it is going to be on this line. Check other WM's window manager. That's checking for other window managers are already running. Here's a setup function. Don't really care about this. This is for OpenBSD. No one cares. Scan is going to do something that's going to see if there were other windows already running, other applications already running, I should say. So we could load them into DWM. Probably not what you're looking for. Run is probably where you're going to want to start. So if you are in Vim or NeoVim, if you press the asterisk, it's going to jump to other instances of the function. This is just a forward declaration. There's a bunch of them at the start of the program. Let's press N to go to the actual declaration. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of what's going on for X. So in X, there are events that happen, and these events are put into essentially a queue. So we have this while statement that is saying, well, while the window manager is running, doesn't matter. We're going to call this function X next event. And what this is going to do is find the next event in the queue that is being executed. So these could be like mouse or keyboard inputs, windows being mapped, which means being displayed essentially. And it is going to take that event and it is going to store it in this variable we have right up here. So the type of this is an X event and the variable name is EV. What they like to do, the cyclist people, is keep their variable names really short, which keeps the code nice and tight. But if you don't know what they mean, they're not very descriptive. So it could get kind of confusing. So this is a generic X event. It has a whole bunch of crap in it. So it covers any type of event. And then later on, they're passed to a handler if the handler exists for that event type. So that's the statement right here. If we have a handler for that event type, it is going to pass that event to the specific handler for that specific type. And then the type is refined later on. So same thing here. I'm going to press star for handler. Let's go to the top. So I press GG and then I pressed N. This is where the handler is defined. Now you might be looking at this, you don't know C, and you're like, what the hell is going on? Don't really need to care to pay attention to any of this. Just look at this, and this basically is saying the type here. So like a button press event type maps to a function here, button press. There's a function called button press in the source code. And if the event is a button press event, then it would jump to that function and pass the event to it. Same for all of these. So briefly, there's some stuff like button press is a mouse button being pressed. There's key press down here, which is key being pressed on the keyboard. Mapping notify is saying a window was mapped. A map request is a window saying like, hey, can you map me please? And mapping being displayed on the screen. The window is first created and then later it's mapped, which is displayed. And when it's unmapped, that is when it's like hidden or minimized or whatever. Focus in when a window receives focus and so on. You can go and look up these different types of events. So if I look up xlib x events and pull this up on DuckDuckGo, this particular site, it's like tranche.com. I'm not sure how you say this. This has a whole bunch of stuff that you can read. It's text kind of small. It's the very, very minimal website. There's a lot of text. I use it for references. If I go over like next event types, this is going to have all of these types listed and explained. So if you're saying like, okay, what are the details of a focus in event? Let's open that. You can go through and read these. This is a struct. If you're not familiar with that, it's the structure of the event for this particular event type. So this is a X focus change event. So this focus changing from one window to another, and it has a list of a few other things. One thing I will talk about briefly is a display. So an X, that is your display server. So if you're running a single desktop, even if you have multiple monitors, you're running one display. That display is what is interacting with X. It is where your events are taking place. So you'll see a display passed in for tons of functions. And the details about that don't really matter at this point, but just know that's what that is. So when you're seeing something like wherever we were for here, run. So let's go to run. You can see there's this DPY, that's short for display, that will be used in a lot of places. Most of the functions require it, and that's pretty much all you really need to know about it. If you're writing your own patch or whatever, you don't really need to know any details about it or interact with it much, other than you may be calling a function that requires it, and it's just statically declared up here at the top of the file. So don't worry too much about that. So let's go back to the handlers. You could go through and look at some of these. So like button press, you could jump to that function and you can see what this does. So all of these are taking generic X events, and then they are further refined here. So now you can see this is this X button pressed event like we were talking about earlier. It's redefined as EV instead of E on line 418. And that's just the event has an X button pressed event inside of it, and that's how it's referenced. So now they're going to use EV for the rest of this function and do things depending on what button was pressed, what has focus, and whatnot. So here, let's just walk through this function really quickly. This line 428 is going to be assigning a monitor inside of this. So breaking it down, you can see a couple lines above, line 423, we have a variable monitor m. It is of type monitor. I believe that's just a type defined within the DWM source code. So it's being assigned to the result of this function, win to mon, which is short for window to monitor. Again, they try to shorten everything. So the event has a window inside of it, and a window, an X window, is essentially just an ID of the window. And that's used in a lot of functions. So if you want to stop and see what things you're doing really quickly, we can say, okay, what's this? Jump to this function, and here it is. So I just pressed asterisk on it and pressed in a couple times till I found it. So this function returns a monitor, essentially just returns a monitor, and its one parameter is a window, and that window's variable name is W. So it's going to go through and it's going to check a couple things and try to find the monitor. And it looks like if it doesn't find anything, it's going to return this variable, which you'll also see used a lot, selmon, which is short for selected monitor. So if you have multiple monitors up, it's whichever cursor your monitor is on is usually how they do it. So I guess that's so they don't have any weird errors with like a null result or whatever. They by default just return the selected monitor. So walking through this, W, the passed in window, they're checking if it's equal to root. Like what is root? Root is the root window of the display. So if you're looking here at my desktop, there is my background wallpaper or whatever. This is the root window that all the other windows are inside of. They're all children of the root window. So the status bar, this window, the sys tray windows, anything else that you spawn are children of the root window. So if the window is the root window, the one that they passed in, and here they get the coordinates, then they're going to return rect to monitor. So this is another function that takes a rectangle and finds which monitor it's on. So that's how they return what monitor it is on. And they have to do this because if you have multiple monitors, you have a two side by side, then you can have like this one selected or the other one selected depending on where your cursor is, right? Because the root window spans all monitors. It's one giant window. So that's kind of how it works. So if you were to get a monitor depending on the root window, it's like all of them. So that doesn't really make sense. So they decided to just, okay, let's return the one that the cursor is on. Next, this for loop is going to iterate over every monitor. Here, M next is like their list of monitors, and they're all linked. They essentially have a linked list of monitors. They do this with what they call clients as well, which is essentially a window. But anyway, so they have a list of monitors that all point to each other. So they, for loop, they initialize it. So M is equal to all of the monitors, but what that really does is point to the first monitor in the list. And then they just keep iterating from first monitor to last monitor. Okay. So basically they return the bar window, which is like this whole bar. This is a window itself, the whole thing. So they're going to iterate over all of them, all the monitors, and check if the one that you passed in is the bar window. And if so, they're going to return that, because bar windows are not in the list of clients, which I'll explain here in a second. So a client is like a regular window, like this window, this browser window, whatever else you have open. Those are all considered clients. And it's basically an object or a struct that has metadata around a window itself, because a window, like we're seeing here, is just the ID again. So here we're just going to call this win to client function, which does what you think it does. It's window to client, and it finds a client based on its window ID. So it's going to assign it, and then this if statement also checks like if it's null, and then if it isn't null, essentially, if it's a truthy value, then we're going to return the monitor that the client is associated with. So this client is kind of a large struct. It also has the monitor that it's associated with inside of it. That's the data structure that they've decided to go with. So if we go to the client struct, let's see if we can find this. Here it is. So struct client has a whole bunch of stuff in it. So one is the names. This is like your name up here. Like this is ST, or if I go to Firefox, then it's this. This isn't DWM, by the way. This is just another window manager. Some other stuff, X and Y coordinate, the width and the height, and all these other things, which are kind of self-explanatory. And they have some stuff like border width and old border width for cases where things get unfocused and then like refocused and whatever else. But you can explore the code and kind of find that. These are mostly self-explanatory. This is the client that is next in the list. So if you have multiple windows, they all have an association from one to the other. So if this client would respond and then I spawned one directly afterward, then this next client would be pointing to like this one. So if you were to iterate over all of them, you could just say client.next and then it would point to the next client. What sNext is the selection order. So whenever you select windows in a different order, if I have multiple ones open and I'm selecting them in different orders, that kind of reorganizes this. So when you do something like, if I select this, then this, and then I go down to like here, and I can move my cursor down to like the middle. If I close this window, the next one that is selected is previous in this sort of selection linked list. So if I close that, the one above is selected instead of this one on the bottom right. Even though that was the order of it being spawned or the order of this master stack thing, it's based on selection. So that's essentially what sNext is. It's a selection linked list. Monitor is the monitor that the client exists on, which these all get updated through the code. And then the window, this is the X11 window ID that the client is associated with. So, okay, now that I've gone through all of that, let's go back to our button press thing and continue. And this is a little bit lengthy, but so that was the first if statement explaining all of that. But that's going to give you a lot of context to all of these functions. So basically find out what monitor this window is on. So we can say like, oh, I'm on my left monitor right now. And then it's going to say if the monitor that we found that the window is on is not the selected monitor, so not the active monitor, then it's going to call this unfocused function on the selected monitor, the selected monitor's selected client. So this whole focus and unfocused thing, you can think of what focusing and unfocusing a window does, but it also does some other kind of complex stuff in terms of being able to detect different mouse clicks and things on it. But not important unless you're trying to fix some like kind of complex bug with focus. Then it's going to reassign the selected monitor and say, okay, this other monitor is focused now, right? Because the monitor that the button presses on was a different one. So now we're like, oh yeah, we're on this monitor. Then this is going to call focus null. You could usually pass in a window to this to focus a specific window, but if you pass a null, I believe it focuses the most recently selected or spawned client. It's one of those, but you can go look at the code. I don't want to get too in the weeds here. All right, so all of that will happen. Now we're going to look at this branch if statement. So if the window is equal to the selected monitor's bar window, then it's going to do some stuff, which I believe all this is just if you were to click like a number, it would just go over to that particular tag. So yeah, it does some math and changes some click variables, whatever. Read through it if you want to add some like weird functionality to it or whatever. All right, now this else if statement. So this is if we clicked on the bar window, but if not, then we're going to use this window to client function again to find what client that we clicked on. So here we're going to focus it, stacks the like order of the windows. You could also look at this again. This has to be processed for reasons for like clicking and switching what events are listening for on the window. And then this is just changing this click variable, which is used here. So this invokes some stuff in your config.h. So if we go like config.def.h and we go to the bottom, there is this static buttons array, and this explains what it has on the top. So like this is the type of click. This is just some click enum they came up with. Event mask. So like here, like click client window, you have to be pressing the mod key and clicking button 1, which is your left mouse. And this is going to invoke the move mouse function, and it's essentially not passing anything to the function is what this means. So if we were to look at this code again, it's going to iterate over every button in this buttons list, I guess. And it's going to say if the click type, so we're like assigning this like click client window. So if that happens, oh yeah, buttons is in here. Yeah. So it's iterating over this. It's going to check the index of every single one of these. So if the click event that you already had matches up with the click event here, which you see click client window, and I'll open this next to it actually. Be easier to see, I guess. So click client win, right? So there's 3 of these. That's what happened here. So you say like if you clicked a window, which you did, so it's going to match these 3, and it's going to check the function and the button and all of that. And this is just checking like the mask, so like which modifier keys you had clicked. Then it's going to invoke this function, so the same one over here, like move mouse, toggle floating, resize mouse, and pass in any arguments that it needs to. So if you want to change or add some new functionality to this, you can just add like new entries to here, but if you needed to fix any bugs or add some weird new crazy thing that you think of because you're a creative person, this is where you'd be doing it. So button press is your mouse press. So if we go back to the top, there are a bunch of these. And again, I don't want to go through all of this. This is just kind of giving you an introduction to the variables, what things to look for and to look at. If you wanted to change bar rendering, that's probably going to be associated with this DRW thing that they made. I'm not sure what this stands for. Maybe draw. There's a whole bunch of code in here for like rendering UTF-8 characters and resize things, and you could just kind of like poke around through this and kind of see what this does. I think some of the other important ones might be key press, or again, if you have any bugs that have to deal with like focus or windows being centered or things like that, you could look at, let's see, there's configure request. I think resize might be a good one to look at for like windows not being centered. And again, if you want to look at some rules for these windows, just run xprop, and they'll usually have some different properties in here. These are called atoms, ATOM. So this says like WM delete window. I don't know if there's anything like in here I can especially show that has like anything crazy. So here, like this is a doc, so you can look for any of the atoms in here. Let's see. Yeah, so I found one. Okay, here's the list at the top. So these are the different atoms that are supported. They're written in kind of like Pascal case here. If you want to look them up, you could look on this site or just look up like net WM. Yeah, like type utility. I looked this up before. And you can see what this has to do with stuff. So this is the spec you want to look up, is this free desktop spec. And it has all these different atoms. So if you find something that's sort of like misbehaving, you could go look at like what these are supposed to be doing. So let me look at this again. What was this? Type utility. So if I look that up again. So yeah, type utility. Let's zoom in even more. Indicates a small persistent utility window such as a palette or toolbox. So this will talk about all different kinds of stuff. Splash window. So if you notice like something has this type in DWM, but it's not centered, or they made it like a full window, like how this is like a full client window inside the layout, you could go patch that and just see like what happens when windows are mapped. So let's see, map request is typically where you want to go, and this is going to have some other things. Oh, they do have one special function here called manage, which is not an event handler directly, but this gets called from map request. So essentially what happens when a window first gets created, it gets passed to manage even before it is mapped. So this is going to do some things. Update the Windows title. This kind of dictates where it's going to be placed, its border width. It calls these few functions, which are very important. Window type, I think, might be where you actually want to set some things. Yeah, here. So this is saying if it is this type dialog, which you can see here in the enums, then it's going to set it to be floating. But there might be some other types, like how we talked about. like type splash, for instance, you might want to add that here to this if statement and say like, okay, if it's a dialog or if it's a splash window, we are going to set floating to true, which essentially in C, 1 will be true, 0 would be false. So take that as you will. Yeah, so I think manage is a really good place to look if you're having issues with Windows spawning with like incorrect sizes, locations not being centered, things like that. And it is a lot of reading, but if you see something you don't know what it does or you think it seems suspicious, go check out this spec and go look at this site. These are like the best places to be looking. There's also a PDF. I think I have it on here. No, I don't. It's on my other computer. But yeah, just go start exploring. This is, of course, xlib. There are two X11 libraries that you want to look at. One is xlib and one is xcb. A lot of other window managers are going to be using xcb. It's a little bit different. It's asynchronous, if you know what that means. Like I think Awesome and i3 both use it. Probably many others. This is one of the few that actually uses xlib. But yeah, just go through here, see anything that you're interested in or are sort of targeting, and go read about it. I know it's kind of a pain. People nowadays don't like to read, but just go in here, click on anything. So let's look at like display functions. This has to do with the display that I was talking about. And this kind of explains what things are as well. So open connect to the display. This is something that you'll see in the source code. Xopen display. I think this is in or near the main function, maybe the setup function. And this talks about some basic stuff. And realistically, like people don't like reading walls of text. This is like 2-3 paragraphs max. Like just go read it, figure shit out. And if you have any questions, let me know. I might do a video in the future going over a specific patch or writing my own patch just to give people kind of guidance on how you can do this and write your own stuff. If you have requests for a specific patch that isn't like totally crazy, let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to go over it. So, yep, that's the video.